This is the Authority Company Podcast, conversations with leaders that are designing our future. Hola, I'm Joe Pardavila, and I am terrible with money. No, I'm not terrible with spending it. I'm terrible with not spending it. I'm afraid to spend any money. It drives my wife crazy. But hopefully, today's guest will help me. Her name is Mary Clements Evans. She is the author of the new book, Emotionally Invested, Outsmart Your Anxiety for Fearless Retirement Planning. Mary has spent decades as a financial advisor helping people like me get through what she calls FORO, or the fear of running out, and also the folks that are opposite of us, the FOMO people, the people who spend all their money rather quickly. So we're going to get into all of that. That's all in the book, but we're going to talk about that in our conversation today. We're also going to talk about her concept of money why and how her philosophy can help people today. Mary, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
I'm great, Joe. How are you today?
I'm equally good. Thank you for asking. So I want to start by talking about money, because you spent decades working in finance and financial advising. And so tell me about your relationship with money, because since in my day job, I'm constantly talking about entrepreneurs, and the idea of like taking money from people is just not part of my being. Like I have trouble I can talk about anything, Mary, but when it comes to money, I get all uncomfortable and squeegee. It could be because I'm like the kid of immigrants. I'm not sure why. But tell me about your relationship with money, and not that you fell in love with it, or maybe you did, but when did you realize the importance of money?
Well, actually, I realized I'm not going to tell you how many years ago, but I was young, very young at the time. And I grew up really quite poor. My parents were brilliant people, but through a series of really unfortunate health events, one grandfather was killed in the coal mine when my dad was 8. The other grandfather was crippled in a coal mine. So my parents, being great people, raised, their siblings. And then there was 5 of us kids, and they were doing okay, and things were not bad. And then a 2-ton piece of machinery fell on my father and injured him quite badly. And things were very tough. And my parents actually had to go on, back then, what was considered welfare and government food. There really is government cheese, by the way. I still remember everything that came in that box. And I remember my mother's tears. And unfortunately, I should have asked her why she was crying, but I think I knew. I think it was just shame and fear. And I remember thinking, I don't want that to happen to me. And I was very lucky that it didn't. And now, guess what? I get to try to help as many people as possible make sure that doesn't happen to them either. So how lucky am I?
That's a great story. Thank you so much for sharing it. So the idea of it was, so you think it was really more subconscious that you ended in this, or were you intentionally like, hey, I'm going to go into a job that I'm going to make a lot of money, or was maybe a combination of both?
No, actually, but my mother was born in 1917. So I was a girl. So her good idea for me was to go to school for home economics, which I did that. That did not work out for me. And I left there and I just started to work at a bank. They dressed nice, so I thought they earned more money than, when I worked in a drugstore. And got a job in the audit department. I had no idea what that was. I didn't really have any money. And the bank said, hey, if you'd like to go to school for accounting, we'll pay your way. And I was dating an accountant. He didn't seem all that bright. I thought, well, how hard could that be? So I went to school for accounting and, started in big corporations and slowly worked my way up.
Wow, that's so great. Your story's a book, and I guess that's why you wrote a book. But I'm wondering, Mary, like in terms of like, when do you make that turn from not being successful to, I guess, being uber successful to the point where you're able to help people with their wealth? Because I mean, one thing is becoming wealthy, another thing is helping others. There's a big distinction there, isn't there, Mary?
Oh, there sure is. And, I think I was trying to help people with financial decisions almost my entire career. And as I did with my original career, I sort of stumbled into this. Somebody offered me a job and I thought, well, I'll probably be pretty good at that because I understand Wall Street and I understand money. But what shocked me and let you know what a moron I am, Joe, I didn't realize that the big challenge here was dealing with people's emotions of their money. This wasn't math. This wasn't just a chart or a graph. It was how people feel about it.
All right. So speaking of those emotions that you mentioned, I talk about the fact that I have a weird relationship with money, but also my experience with entrepreneurs. When did you decide to strike out and start your own shingle with your company? Because that's a huge thing. What you went through enough being probably the only woman in the room, surrounded by a bunch of men, and then working way up through the industry, but then decide to start your own. Tell me about the thinking behind that.
Well, as I said, I just stumbled into this career and I was working for a company. And I did not care for a lot of the ways that they were doing this. I was uncomfortable with that. I just made me nervous. And I think a lot of things in the industry made me nervous, but I loved meeting with people. I just loved it and helping them and teaching them. So I decided if I was going to continue in this, which I wanted to do, that I was going to have my own company and make sure that I own the clients. And if something untowards would happen, I could move my clients to some place that I thought was better. And that was really my impetus to do it. And literally, when I started this, I didn't take a dime out of this business for almost a year and a half. And let me tell you something, Joe, around month 12 or 13, that gets really uncomfortable.
I could imagine. And at that point, you have a family and everything like that? Do you have to deal with what's going on in the home front at that point?
Well, it was about 16 years ago, so, there wasn't any kids at home,
Okay.
but I was the primary wage earner in my household, but I had always been a good saver, so I did have money in the bank, which allowed me to do this.
That's great. And so you make the jump. The first year and a half is tricky. When did it all click in where you're like, I made like you had that sort of like, aha, I made the right decision. I knew I was making the right decision, but when did you realize you had like full-fledged confirmation that you made the right decision?
That was probably around year 2 or 3. I think definitely that first year or 2, I was constantly terrified, like, "Oh my gosh, what did I do? I'm gonna end up being a bag lady." I will have thrown everything away. I'm gonna be poor again. And the business, I was so fortunate. The business grew very, very quickly. And, we got to a reasonable level of business in a short period of time. And then I knew. I knew this is what I was meant to do.
That's awesome, awesome. And it's led you into a fantastic career writing the book. And in the book, you talk about the concept of money why. Can you break that down for us?
Well, as I told you a little bit earlier, when I started to talk to people, and when I first started, because I came from corporate America, I was showing charts and graphs, and I realized, oh, people wanted to kill themselves during these presentations. That was not the driver to their behavior. They were not, one definition of alpha and beta away from being successful. So as I got to get to the heart of why they make the decisions, why are you making the financial decisions that you do? Because we make emotion decisions and then we back them up with facts. And I realized that the emotions kind of fall into two major categories. There is behavioral financial terms for this that you will not understand. So I put it in my language because I'm just a simple person. There's FOMO, fear of missing out, and FORO, fear of running out. The difference is FOMOs are really concentrated on today. These are the pleasure seekers. Let's go to on that trip. Let's go out to this dinner. Let's do all these fun things. The FOROs are hyper focused on the future. We have to save. We don't know what's going to happen. When we get in retirement, what's going to be with inflation? And they're really focused on that. And in the book, I described neither one is good nor bad. It's just figuring out who you are and maybe how you can move that needle a little bit if that's what you need to do, particularly to get a happy marriage.
That helps. Can you share an example of one of your clients that was able to grasp this concept and it worked out incredibly well for them?
Yeah, and I think, I've done this with several clients that what happens in both FOMO and FORO. So the FOMOs who just want to spend, 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 and we have shades of FORO, so they come in different flavors, but they think if we start talking about putting money away for the future, that they're going to lose all their fun. So what you have to do is work with them a little bit over time, and you have to give them permission to spend what they want to do. So figuring out what their priorities is. And when I talk to some of these people, Well, the most important thing to me is I really want to travel. I want to make sure we travel. We can do it now. Okay, great. Where do you want to go? What do you think that will cost? And when we do planning, I put that in as an expense, just the same way it would be your mortgage, your electric, your gas. It's travel, but I put it in a separate bucket. So what's nice is it gives them permission to spend that money. If it's $10,000 a year, they can spend up to 10,000. But the other thing it does, if they happen to be married to a FORO who's like, oh my gosh, if we go on that vacation, we're never going to be able to retire. I can prove to them that, yeah, you will. You're going to be fine. You're going to be able to retire as long as we don't, go over that. And, I have many couples that could not even talk to each other about money. Now they're starting to come together and doing it with each other. But I will say, I still have a lot of couples that will not talk about money unless they're in my office and I'm there.
That's funny. So you're a therapist as well. And maybe you could be a therapist for me here too, because I'm certainly in the FORO camp, fear of running out. I'm constantly thinking about this. I think since I was a little kid, I think if you asked me like what my greatest fear as a little kid was either like cancer, the nuclear bomb, or being poor, it probably would have been like being poor, for whatever reason. Again, could just be my upbringing. But funny enough, my great father-in-law passed away about a year and a half ago. And he was definitely in the team FORO because he was like in his 90s. And I remember one time he called up my wife and he said, hey, listen, I'm sorry. I don't think I'm going to be able to leave you guys any money. I think, I don't think I have anything left. And we're like, oh my God, did he, because you hear about all these senior scams. I'm like, was dad scammed or something like that? And my wife had a great relationship with his financial advisor and just said, hey, listen, I don't need to know exact numbers, but like, is everything okay with dad? Do we need to worry about his financial status? And he goes, your dad's fine. He has enough money to live to like 300, not even 100. And so he freaked everybody out for no reason. I think he told multiple children, he has like 5 kids. He told multiple kids, like, I don't think you got much of inheritance. And again, this is now, he's a World War II guy. So he's a greatest generation. So even worse than the boomers. But tell me about, where do you think that comes from? Because again, I know you're not a therapist, but maybe you could help put me on the couch and walk me through this. Where does this come from?
I think that's a great question. And I always try to figure out, is this nature or nurture? And I have to believe it's a combination of both. And here's why. One, I'm one of 5 children. I don't know if you have siblings.
I have one brother.
So we were 5 kids in 8 years. So we're in the same household. We're close together. We are experiencing everything. I am probably maybe one of my brothers too, maybe both my brothers to some extent, not as bad as I was, both FOROs. My sisters are FOMOs. So it's like, what is it, that, just that we're born with, the way that we think, maybe more conservative, that, we have to be that way. So I don't know that you can move the needle a lot, but I definitely think experiences will move the needle. And I will tell you what happened to me. So I was always FORO. I was always like, money goes in the bank. It never comes back out. That is a one-way, ticket. And unfortunately, about 3 years ago, I lost my only child. And my husband, trying to, get me to feel better, kept taking me down to like, where oceans were. And I did feel better. And he's like, we have to buy something at the beach. You need a place to get away to, we need to do this. And I'm like, no, I can't do that. I can't spend the money, even though it wasn't spending it. It was an asset allocation. It was just changing the investment. And I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. And I talked to a billionaire and I was chatting about this. And he says, Mary, there are 3 options here. You can squander your money. Your kids can squander the money, or the government can squander the money. So you get to decide what you want to do. My husband's like, we're getting a beach house. And so events can move that needle. And I'd say I'm a little more FOMO than I used to be, but I'm still FOMO. I'm still using the same tea bag all day long, Joe. I just like, it's ridiculous.
Well, listen, we all can't be perfect. We all can. I like to say none of us can really change, but we can improve. Like it's like we're all iPhones. We can always update our software. So it seems like you found a way to update your software along the way. And in terms of being a financial advisor, maybe you can answer this, but why is finances more complicated than they should be? Is it because of all the bureaucracy involved? And I'll share a story with you. So I'm a first-time homeowner. My wife and I built a home in Charleston a couple of years ago, and we've had so much trouble dealing with like this mortgage world of escrows and principals and stuff like that, and taxes. And all of a sudden, we just got like an escrow refund. I'm like, what is this? I've got to go like down a Reddit rabbit hole trying to figure out what this all means. Like, what? And again, that's just the mortgage part. As you know, there's other layers to it as well. Why is it all so overcomplicated? Is it all complicated so people like you have jobs, Mary? Is that the simple answer?
Gosh, I hope so. No, I mean, y I understand where you're coming from, but here is the reality. Finance is extraordinarily complex because everything that we do, every single thing that we do involves money. And when you're investing in all these corporations, now part of it is probably more complex than it needs to be because we have tax laws, income tax laws on state and federal that are extraordinarily complex. And one of the reasons that they're complex is the Congress and the Senate would pass these laws to try to incentivize people to do things. For example, why is mortgage interest tax deductible? You ever think about that?
No, but I really I don't know anything about that.
Don't know, don't care. The reason
Right.
the reason is they want you to buy home because they felt home ownership was good for the country and the economy. So a lot of these laws were generated based on what they thought would be best for the country. However, one of my pet peeves and why you think like you should know these things. So one of the things I often talk about is the big sin and the big lie. The big sin started in the late 70s and it really went into effect in the 80s. This was so most people then, the burden for retirement, was up to the union, the government, or the employer. Then it shifted to you as an individual. Well, how'd that happen? Well, we passed a law, okay, in the 70s that said, hey, corporations, all pensions have to be fully funded. They did that to try to protect the worker. So the intent was good. The consequence was bad. So what happened, and I worked in corporate America back then, if a company does not have a fully funded pension, which most did not, when they make that pension fully funded, it sort of ruins their profit and loss statement and will lower the share price for that company. So it makes the company look bad. So what did every company do? They weren't required to have these pensions. So they froze or eliminated pensions. So that was the big sin. The big lie was now they turned it over to you with no knowledge and no education. And the big lie was, this is so easy, you can do it yourself. Well, it's ridiculous. No, you can't. I was on the pension committee. We had experts because it's really complex. And the result of this is almost everybody feels that they should be able to do this. Everybody feels that they should understand, that mortgage statement and what the escrow is or what stocks they should be buying, and they shouldn't. It's, you wouldn't give yourself anesthesia. My husband gives anesthesia. All right. He doesn't go in and he doesn't ask the people, I'm looking at these 5 kinds of anesthesia and I want to explain to you the pros and cons of them. And which one do you think you should do? If that happened, no one would have surgery and people would die. So unfortunately, you do have to talk to somebody who knows it.
And Mary, you make a wonderful point there about the pensions, because I was always curious as to why those went away, because the company that me and my wife both worked in was a legacy media company, and they had pensions for many, many years. And then they started to sunset them. I think, like I said, in the 80s, and then obviously in the 90s, while I started working, it became that whole, the 401k and putting like whatever 1% match, whatever that thing is. But so the idea of pensions going away was because they had to be fully funded, and before that, they weren't, Mary? Tell me, like, what it
Right.
was before. Like, people, they just put a little piece in the pension. What was that all about?
So what corporations did is they had this pension fund, right? You've heard that word. So it's a fund like a savings account that you would have. And every year they would put money into that fund. They also had experts that would say that would project out in the future how much money has to be taken out of that fund every year over the next 5 years and, you know, onto perpetuity. Well, that was okay because as people retired, then they made sure they had enough money to pay out everything that was needed that year. But the new law said you need to look at every employee and how long you think they're going to work and sort of discount back how much pension they would receive. And that's the amount of money that needs to be in the savings account. An easy way to think about it is this: you have a mortgage, right?
Yeah.
Doesn't everybody? So every month you pay your mortgage, and you probably are pretty sure you have enough money hanging around maybe for the next year, either through your income or whatever. So, you're feeling good about it. But now I come in and say, you know what? A lot of people end up losing their houses, and we don't want that to happen. So I want to make sure that you have enough money in your savings account to pay off your entire mortgage.
Who has that?
Right. The corporations didn't. You don't, corporations didn't. And so they're like, and here the difference is, of course, if you don't pay the mortgage or you stop that, you don't have a place to live. But keep in mind, this was just a benefit to employees. This was just something nice that corporations, well, not really nice. They did it because they wanted to attract employees, to work at their place. And then they just slowly faded it away or stopped it. And I will tell you, even people in finance, I was stunned. Most workers had no idea what was happening or the impact of that because they weren't really getting reports or paying attention to them. And so you're 40 or 50 years old when that pension goes away, your pension's going to be a half or a quarter of what it was or what it was planned. So now it's a little late by the time you figure it out. Now you're trying to make up for all this stuff that went away.
Wow. Well, I didn't realize today was going to be a history lesson, so I really appreciate that, Mary. Thank you so much. I was always fascinated by that. All right, so let's talk about some common mistakes people make, and you've been doing this for years. So, what's one that comes up that how there's some mistakes where you do the dough, the homework steps, like, why do people still do that? Like, what's the what common one that people do that you're like, I can't believe people are still making this mistake?
Oh, let's see. There's so many. I think on a macro basis, the big mistake that people make is not putting a plan together. If you fail to plan, you plan to fail. So they have no idea how much money they need to retire. And that is a big, big target. They need to have that number in their head early. They need to look at it often, and they need to be making the steps every single day to get them there. That's probably the biggest thing I say.
And some mistakes are picking the wrong financial advisor. So obviously you're the right one. We all know that, Mary. But what are some red flags when you're approaching and meeting with financial advisors? What are some things that people should be on the look for? Not that that these people are criminals or something untoward, but what's a red flag that they should avoid that sort of a financial advisor?
Well, this is a difficult situation because consumers have to completely understand, what all these different titles and names mean, which is just impossible. So if you go on FINRA, which is the federal regulatory arm for my industry, there are 253 financial designations. Now, they will tell you what somebody had to do to get those designations, but they don't recommend or endorse any of those. The two titles that are not there are financial advisor and financial planner. Yet financial advisor and financial planner are the two most searched terms when people are looking for help. We do not have a national standard for those titles. So you need to drill down and figure out who you're talking to. I consider myself a financial advisor, but you could have a college degree and take a weekend course, and you can also call yourself a financial advisor. Doesn't make any sense to me. You go to a doctor, you know what the qualifications are. You go to a teacher, you know what the qualifications are. You hire a plumber, you know what the qualifications are. You go to a financial advisor, you don't have any freaking idea what that person's background is or who you're talking to.
And with all the regulation in banking and finance, how come that's never like it's so like you describe that like makes no sense in this country? Like somewhere else, I'd be like, okay, it makes sense. But like, man, I mean, I'm a Democrat, so I don't mind a low regulation, but like, but some people push back on it. But it's like, man, that seems like such an obvious thing you can regulate, right?
Well, I'll cut the regulators a little bit of slack.
Okay.
Okay. So again, when your retirement was taken care of by the government, the union, and your employer, people didn't need what we have now. They really didn't. So everything was taken care of. You'd save a little money and you thought, oh, I'm going to buy some stock. I'm going to get it. So you talked to a stockbroker, a guy, and it was always a guy. I don't know any women that did it back then, but this guy would sell you shares of GM or AT&T or whatever it is. So you get these stock certificates, you collect your dividends, buy a few things with it, put the stock certificate in a safety deposit box. You pass away, your kids open it up, it's worth a lot of money, and they'll go, wow, mom and dad were really great investors. But as pensions started to go away, 401ks came in, people were trying to do this themselves, and it's a tanker truck trying to turn. This has taken a long path. So now this need that wasn't there before has evolved, and so many people need to figure this out. Well, we all know when a need crops up, people rush in to fill that need. Some of the people are really good. Some of the people, they're not so good, you know, and they're looking for a quick way to make a buck on somebody and not really solve the overall problem. So I have a little letter in my book to the industry that we need to change this. We need to step up to the plate. If you have a high school diploma and you're just selling some stuff and that's what people want, that's fine. But you should know that's who you're talking to. You know, if you're looking for a full financial plan and somebody with, you know, tons and tons of education and education in this industry, you know, we essentially, CFP is like a master's, you know, in financial planning and years of experience, then you should know what that person's called. But they shouldn't be called the same thing. You know, like a tech that's in the operating room does not have the same title as a surgeon. They're both in the operating room, but they do very different things. And we just need to start to lay that out very clearly for people so they know who they need, when they need them, and who they're talking to.
That's good stuff. One of the reasons I love doing podcasts, Mary, is I feel smarter after speaking to smarter people because I'm obviously not that bright. So, like, thank you very much for sharing all this information. It's very enlightening. And so I always wrap up these conversations talking about the dedication of the book. And you mentioned him earlier, but you dedicated the book to my beloved son, Dan, whose brilliance and humor I miss every day. First, sorry for your loss. But second, why was it important for you to dedicate the book to Dan?
Well, one, of course, he was a great guy, but he also worked in the industry with me. So he was in my office when he seizured and we found out that he had brain cancer. So I think he would be over the moon with this book. I really do. And he has 4 children. And, you know, I think it's very nice for them to realize that this book is, you know, dedicated to their dad.
Awesome. That's great. Her name is Mary Clements Evans. The book is Emotionally Invested, Outsmart Your Anxiety for Fearless Retirement Planning. Mary, thanks so much for the time. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thanks, Joe. I really appreciate your time. It was great talking to you.
And that's going to do it for this episode of the Authority Company podcast. If you want to find out about Mary and our other fine authors, go to theauthoritycompany.com.